Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. The American kleptocracy is getting more brazen with each passing day. I'm going to bring Stacy Herbert in right away. We can get on top of this story. Stacy, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Well, Max, you throw it to me. I'm going to throw it directly to this video.
I'm Ed Whitaker from General Motors. A lot of Americans didn't agree with giving GM a second chance. Quite frankly, I can respect that. We want to make this a company all Americans can be proud of again. That's why I'm here to announce we have repaid our government loan in full with interest, 5 years ahead of the original schedule.
So that's good news, right? Yeah, that was Edward E. Whitaker, Jr., Chief Executive of General Motors, saying that the American people have made money on their investment in his bailout.
But wait, it's the kleptocratic code. Tell us more.
Well, the next headline, repaying taxpayers with their own cash. Classic Ponzi scheme, of course. You pay one group of investors with another investor's money, but in this case, it's actually the investors are themselves being paid with their own money. So it turns out that, according to Senator Charles E. Grassley, Republican of Iowa, he found that what was happening with this announcement on April 21st that General Motors was paying back the $6.7 billion loan they took under the Troubled Asset Relief program, it turns out that it was, in fact, from another account of General Motors held at the Federal Reserve, at the Treasury. What Grassley calls a government-enabled TARP money shuffle.
Do the money shuffle, do the TARP shuffle. Well, yeah, they've got all these accounts, you know, offshore accounts, onshore accounts, fake accounts, TARP accounts, bailout accounts, and they just shuffle money back and forth, and they securitize it, they shuffle it.
But it is the way a classic Ponzi scheme is run. So I'm going to head on over to another fraudulent allegations being made. Of course, we know about Goldman Sachs. Now, here's the headline. Goldman needs to be less mysterious, Blankfein says. Now, he said this to National Public Radio. And he's saying that the only reason why people are so outraged about them is that they're just too mysterious, Goldman Sachs. People don't understand how they operate. Mm-hmm. Now, it reminded me of something that I remember Bernie Madoff, the biggest Ponzi scheme operator ever in the history of the world, saying. Take a look at this clip.
In today's regulatory environment, it's virtually impossible to violate rules. When this is something that the public really doesn't understand. And if you read things in the newspaper and you see somebody, violate a rule, you say, well, they're always doing this.
Stacy, you're onto something here, which is just so fantastic. The parallels between Madoff and Blankfein. They use the same exact language to try to legitimize the exact same Ponzi scheme scams. Please continue.
Well, I'm going to bring you to Lloyd Blankfein on Charlie Rose's show. Again, this is on public television.
Has there ever been a time when Goldman's investment advisors bought securities from Goldman for a client, and at the same time, Goldman was simultaneously shorting it?
I have to explain. See, this is a problem. As a market maker, we are buying and selling 1,000 times a minute.
Our firm, for example, alone, we trade in excess of $1 trillion a year. So, and that's one firm. So when you look at the scope of the trading that goes on today in Wall Street, and you look at what we would consider to be the infractions, they're relatively small.
So you did notice that very, very, very long pause that Lloyd Blankfein gave after being asked to explain what they were doing. Was it a bad thing to be shorting their own securities?
Yeah.
But he came up with the idea of market making. So I want to ask you because, of course, Bernie Madoff was also famously a market maker. And that's how a lot of his investors, when the returns were too good to be true,
right,
they kept with him because he was a market maker.
That's right.
And they thought he was able to front-run trades, therefore. So can you explain to us what a market maker is, Max?
Right. In this context, it's a Ponzi scheme. And Lord Blankfein, when he uses the word market maker, what he's talking about is, in effect, a Ponzi scheme. In other words, it all centers around the concept of inventory. In other words, a market maker has an inventory of that thing, that security that they have in reserve to fill trades when it's necessary. If it's done in real time, you're acting as a broker. If you're doing it in delayed time and you're building up your inventory, you're acting as a so-called principal. If you're doing it in effect like Bernie Madoff was doing it, taking in new money to pay off old money, and the time constraints have been removed, and the whole concept of an audited real-time inventory accounting has been obliterated, you just have a Ponzi scheme.
So, well, Bernie Madoff is also speaking before the public in this clip that we keep turning to. And it's a round-table discussion. And as you see, he has a very similar demeanor. If you put them side by side, Lloyd Blankfein and Bernie Madoff, they're like honest guys. They've got that sweet smile. They're just like bankers trying to explain to the public how it's all done.
They're both con men.
Now, Bernie Madoff, in his interview, in this roundtable discussion he had, he does say that, there is inherent conflict in the role of market maker. So does Lloyd Blankfein in his interview with public television. And then he says, however, it's become less fraudulent, Bernie Madoff was saying, because there's now computers running it. It's algorithms. So I want to turn to this final clip where he's referring to this.
So by taking the human being out of the equation to a great extent and turning it over to a computer to make the decision, I guess you could also program the computer to violate a regulation, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, well, Stacy Herbert, let me explain something about computer-aided market making. In other words, using computers to commit Ponzi schemes, as Goldman Sachs does, and like Bernie Madoff did. All you're doing is outsourcing your fraud to a computer algorithm and saying that, we had nothing to do with it. Just because we programmed the computer to commit fraud doesn't mean you're any less culpable in committing fraud. So in other words, anyone who's arguing against Goldman Sachs on the grounds of moral decrepitude should really understand that what's being committed here is not a lapse of moral authority, but a mathematical certainty. They've programmed their computers to commit fraud.
He's saying that you can tweak these algorithms to commit fraud for you if you want.
And Goldman said when they were caught with the high-frequency trading algorithms as it was being transported over country borders, that yes, it's used for market manipulation.
Actually, the state prosecutor said that it could be used for market manipulation. That's true.
And that's what they use it for.
But I want to go on to another point about this story, where this is the meme that Goldman Sachs is putting forward, and we saw it from Fabrice Torre, Daniel Sparks, all other people who testified before Congress last week. They kept on saying, we're just market makers, we're market makers, we're market makers. And I think this is their defense against this allegation of fraud in this John A. Paulson versus Royal Bank of Scotland and IKB Bank. But this brings me to this next headline.
Yeah, this is a specific, let's drill down to some specifics here, drill down to the mechanics of fraud.
And this headline comes from MaxKeiser.com.
I love that site, MaxKeiser.com. It's a great site.
Oracle of Omaha defends Lloyd doing God's work Blankfein, says RBS was dumb to lose $900 million on Goldman's allegedly fraudulent CDO. So the sage of Omaha, as he's known, the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, the world's richest man, he was speaking publicly for the first time since the Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil fraud charges against Goldman Sachs. And now everybody knows Warren Buffett is a huge investor in Goldman Sachs. That's right. He says actually he loves his $5 billion stake in the investment bank and branded the Royal Bank of Scotland as dumb for losing $900 million on the $1 billion transaction under scrutiny.
That's an odd use of the word dumb in this case because...
Well, they're supposed to be sophisticated investors
right.
They're selling
We're told that these are only for sophisticated investors. But Warren Buffett is saying that Royal Bank of Scotland was stupid, and they're not sophisticated, and they were played for a chump. And they were. How much did they lose? $1 billion on these things?
$900 million on a $1 billion CDO.
Well, Warren Buffett has drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, if you mark to market his performance and to strip out the fraud, you end up with a stock that's not an impressive stock at all, Berkshire Hathaway. And that's the problem with the media in the U.S. The CNBC, for example, they lionize guys like Warren Buffett, even though he's just a front man for some shysters on Wall Street.
Now, speaking of dumb money, unsophisticated money. It's called sophisticated money because it's the big pension funds who manage on behalf of unsophisticated investors, individual investment pension holders. Muni bonds, time to head for higher ground. So we've just had this giant explosion based on subprime mortgages, and those were packaged into securities and sold to pension funds around the world. Those have blown up, wiped out pension funds around the world, wiped out banks around the world, investment banks, countries, as you see with Greece, now having to take hundreds of billions of dollars in new debt to pay off old debt. Well, this is Schwab and JP Morgan have joined forces to bring you more access to municipal bonds.
At the top of the market.
At the top of the market.
Right. They need suckers and stupid people to buy in at the absolute worst time.
Well, this Jesse, who on this blog writes, let's see record low interest rates and looming risk of default from undisclosed obligations, or perhaps a brisk uptake in inflation. Sounds like a plan for the big dogs to unload.
Yeah, let's get James Cramer on CNBC getting people into this new investment to lose their shirt on.
And, of course, JP Morgan and Schwab are just being the market makers here.
That's all. They're just market makers. They're not criminals. Bam! Off with their heads. Okay, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for, once again, being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Stay tuned. Much more right after this.
Millions died here, and millions looked forward to be helped and saved. The pain and sufferings will never be forgotten, as well as the joy of liberation. Europe, spring of 1945, on RT.
In India, RT is available in the Grand Central Sheraton Mumbai, the Taj Mahal, the Maratha Mumbai, Taj President Mumbai, Majorda, Baywatch Resort, Bogmano Beach Resort, Park Plaza Gurgaon, Taj Mahal Hotel, Claridge's, the Ashok, Samrat Hotel, Taj Palace Hotel, Crown Plaza, the Meridian, the Leela, Jaipur Hotels, Sheraton New Delhi Hotel, the Mario, AB Hotels, Clarion Collection, Ramada Plaza, the Aman, Maidens Hotel, the Leela, Park Plaza Noida, Radisson, Shiv Niwaz Palace, Fateh Prakash Palace.
All right, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time to welcome to the show Michael Krieger. Michael is a former macro analyst at Sanford Bernstein, and before that he was at Lehman Brothers. Currently, Michael is running his own shop at Krieger Asset Management. He writes often on the financial and economic situation, and you can find his writings posted at zerohedge.com. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Max and Stacy. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
All right, super. Now, Michael Krieger, you write in one of your recent posts, quote, insights into America's Disneyland in our neo-feudalistic gulag casino economy. Give us your insight. What is this America's Disneyland you are referring to?
Essentially, what is Disneyland, right? I mean, Disneyland is the vacation you take to escape reality completely, right? It's a complete fantasy land. Nothing is real there. There's no semblance of reality. If you were going to take let's say you took a trip to the south of France, right? Okay, you're going to relax, but there is reality around you, right? There is none at Disneyland. You have fireworks every night, right? I mean, it's a complete fantasy. Well, if you think about America right now, and actually it applies to a lot of the world, but particularly America because we have the reserve currency, right? I mean, where else, right, but Disneyland could you print money out of thin air and buy resources, real resources with it, right? In an unlimited fashion. It's pure fantasy.
Now, you're talking about the crossover between, managing money and consciousness, which up until recently, these two have been mutually excluded in a lot of ways. Now, in the case of Disneyland, here's an environment that's hermetically sealed where it's, quote unquote, the happiest place on earth. And there's enormous pressure when you're inside a Disneyland environment to be happy. It's and it goes in part and parcel with the American founding, which of course is about the pursuit of happiness. Now, when you say that there's a breakdown in this hermetically sealed Disney-like economy where people are pursuing happiness, are you opening yourself up to being challenged to be anti-American?
Being anti-American, I mean, being anti the system that we have, right? Essentially, my argument would be it's not American, right? I mean, it's a system of empire, right? It's an imperial system, but it's sort of this soft imperialism, right? That's enforced via the dollar. Okay, so I mean, at the end of the day, right? You look behind the curtain, Mickey Mouse is driving a tank, right? And you don't want to admit that, but when you really look at it, that is how Disneyland is defended. Disneyland does not exist, right, out of nowhere. It's defended by a military which defends the dollar, which defends the pricing of oil in dollars, which essentially keeps Disneyland running.
But, well, of course, famously, another famous children's story or environment is The Wizard of Oz, which had, of course, Oz, and the Yellow Brick Road was all about pursuing the gold standard. It was an allegory. So, and you're talking about gold as returning to some consciousness-based, reality-based economy.
From a financial standpoint, you want to really short the system, that's how you do it, right? I mean, that's the weakest link. And I know you've talked about, boycotting Coca-Cola or something like that, and I think those ideas are good, but at the end of the day, right, what I'm trying to influence on my level, right, is the financial community, because that's where I have a voice, right? And if I can convince even 10% of the money managers or people that I have influence with that have capital to go out and buy physical gold, right, which I know I've done already and hoping to do more of, that's how you truly make change, right? Because if you cut off, right, the ability of governments to push forward this warfare welfare model, right, which is certainly centered in the United States but exists everywhere at this point, that's how you, out of that rubble, right, you can create something new. And that's what I think we have a great opportunity to do, and we don't want to miss that opportunity.
Well, what's happening is, thanks to your work and putting the word out there, and certainly what we've been talking about, if enough people own gold around the world, you end up with a de facto gold standard anyway.
I think you actually have that already, right? So in other words, it's not going to function properly at this time, because what needs to happen is you need to get rid of these legal tender laws, right? And you need to get rid of taxing, capital gains on gold and things of that nature. But already I do believe that you've hit the point of no return, where you see gold breaking out in euros. I think it's at a new high even today after this bailout, right? I mean, no one even flinched, right? If you're a German, right, and you're upset about this and you've got capital, I mean, what's the logical thing for you to do? Are you going to change your euros into dollars? I mean, some people might. You might do that with a little bit of your capital, but the smartest thing to do is go buy gold, right? I mean, that's your way of rebelling against your government policies. That's also a way of preserving your standard of living in whatever comes next. Because, I mean, if people really think that something's not coming next, I think they're completely they're so in Disneyland, and they're going to be on that ride at the end where your head gets ripped off, essentially.
All right, you mentioned the dollar and gold, and of course, when you're talking about these two, you got to mention China. Let's talk about China. You talk a little bit about does China need the U.S. economy to collapse?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really saying here is, look, China and the U.S., this is what a lot of people missed, right? And still, where I disagree a lot with Asian bulls is, okay, 20 years from now, will Asia be the center of the global economy? Probably, right? But that doesn't mean there's not going to be a horrible period in between of political chaos, turmoil, and I believe that's almost inevitable, right? And so what the Chinese essentially are doing, if you take a step back, right, and I watch them very closely, exactly what they've done since the crisis hit, they have been no more willing to make difficult choices than the United States has, right? So they're just doing it in their own way. So whereas the U.S. is trying to prod its consumers, right, to go out and eat at the trough again, right, to spend, right, buy that SUV and hold hands and everything will be good. China's doing the opposite, but also just continuing on their old path, right, which is fixed asset investment, right, building. I think I saw a stat that said something like China has maybe a third of the rivers that the United States has, and double the bridges or something like that. They have malls. They have malls that are completely empty. The biggest mall in the world is completely empty, right? Cities that are empty. So they continue on this path. My point is that if China's ever going to fill that infrastructure, right? How are they going to do that, right? The only way they're going to ever do that, right, if that happens, is by having the United States dollar completely collapse and having the yuan in some ways take over that role. Right, so that way the Chinese, let's say the U.S. consumes 18 million barrels of oil a day, including products and refined products, everything, right? So they in a lot of ways, in my opinion, need the U.S. consumption to go down another 5 million and China to take that 5 million. And then they can fill their cities, fill their highways, etc. But someone's losing here, right? And that's my concern as an American. The longer this goes on, right, the longer the charade goes on, right, the more China needs what we have, which is overconsumption, essentially.
Right. The way the relationship is talked about is symbiotic, but we are saying it's really adversarial.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I actually believe that, I've said this to a lot of people. I think World War III essentially has already started, and it's in the financial markets. And I think it's being played out right now. My fear, right? Look, the thing is this. I constantly, and I wrote this in my email, are the leaders in China really stupid or really dumb? Okay, really stupid or really smart? We're going to find out, right? This is and I have so many different responses to this. We'll know in 2 years, right? One way or the other. But they could just be really as corrupt and greedy and out to lunch as the Americans. I mean, otherwise, why would they have all this long-term treasury paper, right? The whole time they should have been building up their gold reserves.
Let me hit you with a concept, Michael Krieger, which is something I just read, and I'll put a link to it, hopefully, on this broadcast. It's not my thought. But what if the world central banks are effectively locked in a game theory situation, and China realizes that if they're the first mover and they monetize their gold supply, the fact that they've got less gold than the U.S. works to their favor because they have effectively not only monetized their gold but devalued at the same time.
I've definitely thought about this concept and what people could do, and right now we're definitely in this sort of game of chicken, right? I mean, you could call it game theory, sure, but Ben Bernanke's basically saying 0%. We're gonna food stamps. We're gonna make sure the banks make money. Everyone's gonna be fine. We're gonna push this aggregate demand, right? This phony aggregate demand out there, and China's doing the same thing. So China's basically everyone. Here's the thing: everyone's made promises. This is how I see it, right? China's said to its people, we're gonna grow at 10% forever. You're gonna have a better standard of life than the people that came before you. India is saying the same thing. The U.S. is saying the same thing. Europe is trying to keep it together, right? So politicians basically all over the world have made promises they can't keep, and so everyone's just going full throttle, right, in the money printing game. That's essentially what it is, right? And is someone going to blink? Is someone going to make a move? Or is it just going to be that commodities continue to skyrocket higher and then sovereign yields skyrocket higher and the whole thing blows up and no one's got a plan? The key thing is that you better be, right, prepared for when this thing blows up and have a plan, right? And I don't know if China has that. They might. What if they say the yuan's convertible to gold, right? What if they did something like that?
According to game theory, everyone else would be forced to convert their currency to gold, and in the U.S., actually because they are sitting on more gold bullion, effectively China would be simultaneously devaluing, which of course they want because they want to be able to have cheap exports. So, they could pull the ultimate, F you, if I can say this phrase on this show, to the world by saying, you know what, we're going to monetize our gold even though we've got less gold, and we're therefore going to accept hundreds of billions are going to flood into our economy overnight because we've got the only hard currency in the world.
Exactly. And I thought this back when the crisis was going on and the ruble was crashing, if you remember. I mean, I remember hearing how the central bank in Russia was essentially, trying to prevent that somehow, right? And my point was just take whatever you've got, buy all the gold you can in the market, because remember at that point gold wasn't doing too well either. Go buy all the gold bullion possible, and then announce to the world that the ruble's backed by gold. And what would happen, right? Overnight, everyone would rush into ruble, the ruble would appreciate, and it'd be over. It'd be game over. So I think, look, it's the golden rule, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. That exists for a reason, right? It's still true, right? And so whoever is smart enough, right, whatever country is smart enough to figure that out, take the steps now, right? And then when the time is right, just throw it out there, essentially, they're going to win.
Yeah, but, you know, the power of Oz behind the curtain, the power of the Disneyland message is profound. After World War II,
Sure.
the world still believes in Mickey Mouse, and they still believe in the greater goodness of America. And to take on the America, they would have to admit to themselves that the American dream is a facade and that they're on their own. We're going to have to cut it off right there, Michael Krieger, but thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.